So you've got to look at your diet, I guess, and look at how you can have a healthy diet that reflects maybe a restoration perspective. You know, I think I'm transitioning that thinking. Now, at the moment, you know, dairy for me is something which, you know, I would struggle without. You know, meat I could probably live without. Dairy might be more difficult. You know, but ultimately, you know, I'm always led by God, and, you know, and sometimes he leads you without expressively telling you stuff, and you just find yourself thinking differently about things. It's good to see you.
Yeah, we were just talking about our experiences going to church.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess people have all sorts of experiences of church in different ways. Obviously, my experiences come generally from leading churches, so they're slightly different in that you're involved in setting the agenda that the church operates under. So you do have a little bit more to say in that. But ultimately, God eventually showed me that what we were doing really wasn't what he'd ever asked us to do. But I wouldn't knock churches at wherever they are, because they're on their own journey, you know, and those churches have got to take people with them on that journey. Otherwise you end up sort of everything dispersing. And so you know, at the moment I tend to go on a Sunday with my partner because she likes going. You know, would I go on my own? Probably not, because I just don't need that interaction in that way. But she loves the people, and we make friends and things like that. So there's relationship, I think, is the key. You know, I don't go for the preaching or the worship or anything like that, but there's relationship, and there's people, and there's friends. But each group of people is on their own journey, and you've got to respect where they are on that journey, even if you may not feel that's where you are. And that's the choice we can all make. If you don't feel that you can relate to where people are, then don't go. But, you know, if relationship's important and it's okay, you can sort of go with things. I mean, I would struggle to go to a traditional place where it was very, you know, hellfire preaching and stuff like that. But, you know, where I'm going is got love. You know, just the message is preached, and so I'm okay with that. But I'm generally going because I'm supporting Debbie, so I'm not really going for myself, but I enjoy meeting people. And so I've had some really good conversations with some people, and that opens up an opportunity and avenue for fellowship and friendship, and that's good. But the doctrine, theology, and other things, you know, if I had to say that I agreed with everything that's preached or everything that's sung, I would probably say I can't. You know, I can't agree with everything that someone is preaching and because they're not coming from the same perspective that I've got to. But that's okay. At the end of the day, you know, I'm not there to try and convince someone of my perspective. I'm not there of that at all. So I don't really talk about anything controversial unless it's a personal conversation, you know. But it's interesting that a lot of people making it. So the very first time I went to that church, a guy was doing communion, and he talked about engaging the throne room and an open heaven. I thought, oh, this is interesting. I wasn't expecting that. So I went up to talk to him afterwards, and he said, well, yeah, I come from a mystic perspective. So I thought, oh, he's quite an older guy, but lovely. And I thought, okay. And he was obviously included in what was going on. So, you know, from that perspective, you know, I think everyone's on that journey, and it takes a long time for certain groups to move very far, but individuals do, you know. And then I was talking to someone else, and they said, oh, have you listened to this video? It's my brother or brother-in-law. And I thought, oh no, what's that about? And it was about trans relocation and moving in the spirit and everything else. And she was very open to show me what her brother-in-law was teaching and doing. And again, it was very much from a mystic type perspective. So it's out there, you know, and God is doing a lot of really good, positive things. And sometimes being in a place to connect and be part of someone's journey is a really important thing. So, you know, but everyone has to make their own choice and decision, and not feel you have to, or something bad is going to happen. At the end of the day, we're all church. We're all part of what Jesus is building and establishing on earth as it is in heaven. Whether we go to a meeting or not doesn't make us not actually part of, what God is doing. The meetings are flavored according to the people and the streams and the different air where they are in their journey. But the relationships are always important.
Yeah. What about if you feel that the much of the teaching or the sermons are really leading people astray, in that they think that they have to earn God's approval, and they think, the perspective is all wrong. I mean, I listened yesterday to a sermon, and it was about, it started like, we should look at God and see what he's like. God is very generous. God is very good. God is very loving. And I thought, oh, that's great, that this will be a great sermon, and then it continued, like the main thought of the rest was, so God is like that, so we should be like that.
Yeah.
So we have to also be generous, and we have to also be good, and we have to be generous toward one another. And of course, it's true. We should. I mean, it's a good thing to be good and generous, to forgive like God forgives. But I mean, that was not the main thought. I mean, was it? I mean, we can't do that in our own strength.
No.
So looking at God like that, I mean, and thinking, oh, I have to be like him, that's not going to solve the problem, is it? I mean, it's going to give me a burden instead of freedom.
Well, yes, in one sense, yeah. If you look at it from that perspective, oh, God is like this, so we must try to be like him. No, that's never going to work. But if you look at it from the perspective of God is like this, and if we encounter him and let him change us to be like him, that's a different matter. And of course, that's where the experience comes in. You can't leave the experience out of the process. Otherwise, it is a self-effort. Oh, I must be like God. I must try harder. That will wear you out. But if we encounter the God who is like that, and he loves us and we receive his love, then we can love other people the way we've been loved. And I think that is the key. It's love one another as I've loved you. So if we experience that, who God really is, kind and generous and merciful and gracious and loving, then that will inspire us to be like that, because we become like who we behold. So the more time we spend with God like that, the more we become like him. But it's not self-effort or trying. It's an outworking of what we've experienced. Freely we've received, freely we can begin to give. But not under compulsion or duty or obligation, but out of nature. That's God's nature. He is kind and generous and loving and unconditionally, and limitless great. That's his nature. If our nature, how we were created in his image and likeness, is metamorphosed from what we have been shaped by the world into to become like him, then we will then reflect the same things that we've experienced. But if you're just trying to do it out of religious duty and obligation, or because we feel we should do, it will very quickly wear us out, because we'll keep failing. Because how can we try and be like God? But exactly. And most of those people who are told to try and be like God have never really met God in intimacy in a face-to-face type experience. So they're only going on what the Bible says about God, or they're only going what the sermon says about God. They've never really experienced him at that level. When they do, it's totally different. I would struggle with unconditional love until I experienced unconditional love, and then the Father was, oh, love like I've loved you. And then I can't look at people the same anymore. I can't judge people by the flesh. I have to judge them in the spirit, in they're my brothers and sisters. in the spirit. So therefore I can see them differently. I can start to see them the way God sees them. That changes how I interact with people. Because then if I've experienced unconditional love, how can I treat people in a conditional way? Well, I'm going to love you if, or, you know, I'll do if, and it's always an if. But with God, there is no ifs. It's just, I love you. You know, and hopefully that will inspire us and help us to be able to love as we've been loved. You know, and that for me is the key, is being loved.
Yeah. Isn't it also about being changed ourselves?
Yeah.
By knowing our identity, because when we are broken and weak in ourselves, then it is very hard to really love others from the heart and to be like God, you know, because we are broken and weak. And so we need ourselves to be changed by knowing our identity, to remember who we are. So like that verse, you know, about looking in a mirror and looking at God, looking at the glory of God as in a mirror.
Yeah.
So how would you interpret that verse? Because I read in the Mirror Bible, it says, oh, sorry, my cat. She wanted to be part of it. It's she can't sit here. Anyway, it says that, let me see. The glory of God is the image and likeness of our Maker, redeemed in human form. This is what the gospel of Christ is all about. So that Jesus was showing us who we are.
Yeah.
So looking at Jesus, looking at God, we can see ourselves in that mirror, and then we can remember, oh, I am not weak. You know, I need to remember that. I am not weak. You know, I am strong. And then we can, you know, instead of looking at God in that way, we can look at in the mirror and see God's glory and see that, okay, in my spirit, he has made me like that.
Oh, absolutely. So
that can make me free and more strong.
Absolutely. I think the whole sort of way the Mirror Bible is translated from that perspective. It's all about not what we are to become, but who we already are. And the revelation of who we already are will bring about our transformation into that reality. And it is like looking into his face and seeing how he sees us. You know, that's the he sees us because he's fearfully and wonderfully made us. He has a vast sum of amazing thoughts about us, from Psalm 139 that describes that. You know, so the way he sees us is very different from the way we've seen ourselves from the world's perspective. Or when we look in a natural mirror, what do we see? We see our image. Well, actually, God made us a little lower than him and clothed us with glory and majesty and gave us to rule over the works of his hands. And effectively, that's Psalm 8. And ultimately, we are clothed with our identity, that glorious identity, but we've lost sight of it. And God gives us glimpses of it when we look into his face so we can see the fullness of it. So it is about intimacy. You know, we have to be close enough to see in a mirror. You know, you could look into a mirror that's 50 yards away, you wouldn't see much. You know, although there's an image there, you couldn't see much of it because it's so far away. But when you come close, that's when you begin to see the reality of it. Unfortunately, we have had that reality twisted and changed. I did my Patreon group teaching last night, and I did a session on unconditional love, I think session 15, and I talked about the way in which our image, God's image, our image, and the way God interacts with us has been twisted by wrong translations of the Bible. You know, using words which reflect more of a penal way that God treated us and treats them, and also our image has been shifted. And I use 3 verses to say, if you translate these verses correctly, it will totally change your view of how what God did with Jesus on the cross and how he treats us, you know, how we see ourselves and how we see God interacting with us. Because those verses were translated by translators who had a framework of thinking which was very evangelically based in penal substitution atonement. One would be Isaiah 53:10. And Isaiah 53:10 doesn't actually say that God was pleased to crush him or bruise him. It doesn't say it. So what does it say? It says that God was pleased to heal him or restore him or heal, or the word is, you know, purge him or refine him of his wound. And it's like, well, where did the wound come from? So God didn't crush him or desire to bruise him. He desired to cleanse him from his wound. So where did the wound come from? Well, he took on our woundedness. He took on our wounded identity, our lost identity, and God healed us in him. So God healed the whole of mankind of his lost identity in the body of Jesus, who took our place. Well, that totally changes that whole understanding that God was there punishing Jesus instead of punishing us. No, God was there to heal us in him. And we put him on the cross. Yeah. God didn't. Well, that totally changes that view. And there's another scripture which is, again, very well used in, I think it's Jeremiah 17:9, that the heart is deceitfully wicked above all things and incurable. And it's like, that's what I was taught. Your soul, your heart is incurable. It is wicked. You can't trust it. Therefore, you've got to suppress it. And there's no concept in there. It's hopeless. It's incurable. Well, no, actually, when you look at what that's written, and part of the problem is people in modern translators have a framework of translation, but they also use the original Greek and the original Hebrew. But in the original Hebrew, Jesus didn't use the original Hebrew. He used the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the original, as did Paul and the New Testament writers, which was a modern, from 3rd century to 1st century, after all the prophets had prophesied, and there was no more from God in what they call the Old Testament. There was a revelation that changed their view of God, changed it from the view of God, which was this undifferentiated view of God and Satan. Therefore, if something bad happened, it was God and Satan did it. If something good happened, it was God. They didn't have this view of, well, no, there's bad stuff and there's good stuff. God does the good stuff. And actually, there's an enemy who does the bad stuff. They saw it all as God, but they're wrong version of God. So when you actually look at the Septuagint, right in Jeremiah 17:9, it actually says, the heart is deep, you know, and it is the man. You know, nothing about it's wicked. It's translated, the heart is wonderfully deep. Well, it is. There's a depth to us and who we're made in the likeness and image of. So you completely change our understanding of who we are, our identity, our, you know, it's the thing of, well, you're a sinner saved by grace. No, you're not. You're righteous. You've been made the righteousness of God in Christ. You're no longer a lost identity. But people have been told, and that whole thing of the heart being deceitfully wicked, you can't trust. Therefore, you'll never be good enough, you know, because it's incurable. Therefore, it lessens that view of God from you've been made a little lower of God and clothed with his glory and majesty to you're a worm who's going to struggle the rest of your life because you're a sinner. And unfortunately, when people believe that reality, they operate out of that reality rather than, well, no, I'm a son. You know, and then in the New Testament, there was a passage in Romans 5:9 that says that we have been made righteous through his blood and been saved from the wrath of God. Well, actually, it does not say the wrath of God in the Greek original. That's added by translators. It just says you will be saved from the wrath. And they add God, and in the new NASB, it puts it in italics because it was added by the translators. It's not there. But in the NIV and other versions, it actually is there. Now, the King James Version actually says the wrath, or wrath, not God's. So whose wrath is it that we've been saved from? Well, if you look at the book of the Wisdom of Solomon, which was included in our Bible up until the 1500s, and that was from the, again, translated into the Greek through the Septuagint version, it says the destroyer was the one who came to punish. And that's what wrath is, the outworking of the works of the destroyer who came to punish. Well, who's the destroyer? The one who came to rob, kill, and destroy, Jesus said. The thief. He comes to steal from us. So what wrath did Jesus save us from? The wrath of the enemy. Not the wrath of God, but it's been so twisted by translators putting in words that aren't there that it changes the whole meaning of how God deals with us. So rather than God sending Jesus to save us from the wrath that the enemy wanted to rob and kill and destroy our lives and bring us abundant life, because that's what the good shepherd does by laying down his life for the sheep, we have this view of God that he's angry, that he's going to pour out his wrath, and if we get it wrong, he's going to punish us. And that's a complete fabrication. Not there at all. So just 3 verses translated wrongly completely shape how we view God, how we view ourselves, and how we view how God deals with us. Rather than him loving us, he's got wrath. You know, and unfortunately, people have just believed what they read. And because that's what it says in English, that's what they believe. So I think, you know, we've got to find our identity and the truth of who we are directly from relationship with the Father, not trying to get it from what the Bible says, because what the Bible says may be true in the original, but is not always true in modern translations. And they have a particular framework in which they translate from. You can't be unbiased in your translation. No one can. I mean, the Mirror Bible is a biased translation. It's just biased towards love and acceptance, which I would much rather that be the bias, because I think that's who God is, and it's written out of a relationship with God. Most of those other translations are written by professional academic people who are translating with a knowledge of Greek and Hebrew, but not with a knowledge of God, who he really is. So translation should come out of the framework of our experience with God, not the other way around. You know, so it's an interesting process that we're in, and what God is doing is beginning to expose and unveil the lies that we have been programmed by, so we can know the truth and experience the truth, and therefore be like him. Because we're made to be like him. We're made in his likeness and image. We're always intended to be sons, but we've had amnesia. You know, we've lost that true sense of sonship because we walked away in independence. Jesus came to destroy the works of the evil one. What are those works? Well, Jesus said from the beginning, he was a murderer and a liar. So he wants to kill and destroy lives, and he lies and deceives us. But Jesus came to destroy those works. He didn't come to destroy the devil or the evil one. He came to destroy the works of the devil or the evil one, which is very different, which is the process of undoing what was been wrongly done. So whatever Adam did, whatever the enemy has done, Jesus came to undo it and to overcome it and to be victorious over death, so that we live in abundance of life, where the enemy wants to kill us. And we've embraced that death in one sense, because for some people, heaven is a promotion. Heaven is the only way you're going to go and get to see God. So they embrace death as inevitable because they think that's when they're going to actually get the end of this terrible soul that's wicked, and they're suddenly going to be set free. Whereas God intends that to be the life we live here.
Yeah. Happy about all that. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Hi, Mike and Inga. Thank you for that. Okay. Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah.
Good. Mike, in your experiences, can we say there is a parallel world?
Parallel world? Personally, no, I don't believe so. I don't believe in multiple universes or multiple versions of Earth. I believe there are multiple possibilities and timelines that exist until they're chosen and then they are manifested. So I don't believe there's another Earth that's just like this one or multiple Earths just like this one. So we're multiple people in multiple things. I don't believe that. But what I do believe is everything that could happen exists as possibility, and we choose that reality from our choices every day. What we need to do is start choosing from God's reality and what God's desire is, and then we bring about heaven and earth. So, you know, there are multiple dimensions, but they're not other dimensions where Earth exists. We are one planet, the center of creation, designed for the sons of God to bring the rule of God into creation. I don't believe in multiple universes or the multiverse. As much as I like Marvel stories and science fiction around that, which is quite interesting and it's fun, I don't believe that is actually the truth. And there are some scientists who think that's a possibility, and there are others who reject that. There's the multiple worlds theory, and there's multiple timelines that could exist until they do exist, then they don't exist anymore. Just one exists. And that's true for all of us every day. Every day we get choices to make of every second of every day in reality. And what we actually choose then collapses the wave function to form history effectively. So I believe in the quantum realm, there is a whole lot of possibilities that exist as potential. And every one of those would be a different world, if you like, depending on the choice. But that doesn't mean there are different worlds. It just means that potentially there's a lot of different things that could happen in the future. But when someone chooses something, then it does happen, then that possibility no longer exists. And that world that would have been there if someone had made a different choice no longer exists, because the one that actually exists is the one that is there. And of course, there are 7 billion people making choices every day that actually affect what this world is like.
So it's more about the experience. You create your own world by the experiences you go through.
Well, yes, in one sense, but you can choose the reality for your own life aligned to the Father's heart. So you make choices which are the Father's intention for us. So just like Jesus did, Jesus only chose to do what he saw the Father doing. So he knew the Father's heart, outworked the Father's heart, and never did anything contradictory to the Father's heart. Therefore, Jesus created a world in which all of those amazing things that he did has shaped the rest of history, because he only did what he saw the Father doing. But there's still only one world like that. But now what Jesus did shaped the rest of history, and then we get to be history makers and world changers by also doing the things that the Father is calling us to do, or an outworking of the Father's heart. So every time we do that, we change the world for good. And therefore there is a record and a testimony of what we've done as a son within history. And the more and more sons that operate in accordance to the Father's heart, the more the world in which we live will be a reflection of heaven on earth.
So the restoration of all things, are we restoring things only that are on the earth, or things everywhere?
Well, I believe we're restoring everything back to God's original intention and purpose. But you cannot ignore history, but you can see history restored so that the negative effects of things that are happening in history are no longer affecting today. We do that through forgiveness. We do that through dealing with the things that are done. And like Jesus came to undo what Adam did. So we have an opportunity to make sure we don't come into alignment with the things that have happened in the past, but we choose a different future. So we mustn't make decisions based in our past experience or negative past experiences. We choose to make decisions based in the Father's heart, which is why intimacy with the Father is so, so important. To know the Father's heart and then choose to outwork the Father's heart.
So the restoration, okay, you mentioned that, so we are in the middle of the world. The earth is in the middle of the world, and the sons are created to come onto the earth. Is it our duty to then co-create or co-restore everything that fell as a result of the fall? Everything.
Well, yes.
In other universes.
Yeah. Well, I don't believe there are parallel universes, but I do believe there are other creational realities. So there are other galaxies, obviously. There may be other universes. There are certainly parallel dimensions, or there are other dimensions that have other races living in them. And that's all our responsibility, to ensure everything that God has created is restored and set free. You know, Romans 8 says that creation is longing and waiting for the revealing of the sons of God, and that creation will be set free from its bondage to corruption into the freedom of the glory of the sons of God. So when we know who we are, which is in essence the glory, the weight of our identity in God, then we'll begin to bring about creation's restoration, so that creation is set free from whatever bondage it's in. And that bondage can be, associated with the fall of man and man's choice for independence, and also the fall of Lucifer and Lucifer's choice to rebel against God. And that's had an effect on creation, because he's led creation astray. He's led humans astray, following the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He's led fallen beings astray. As it says, 1/3 of the angels of heaven fell. So all of that has placed us in a situation where things are far from what God originally intended, but we are in the period where everything is being restored. But that restoration process is dependent on our knowing our identity as sons and outworking that identity to reflect the Father's heart, to bring about creation's restoration and the freedom of all of the other dimensions and all of the fallen beings and everything that's not as God intended.
Somebody was telling me about beings in the earth, where giants living in places in the earth and they said they were kind of waiting for humans to turn their lives around. He engaged them. I don't think he is walking this path per se, but probably through other means. He engaged them. And it was quite interesting what he was saying about these beings living not in the gutter, the middle of the earth, but living in the crust of the earth. And because of what we have done on the earth, we have pushed them away.
Okay.
And they are living in a dimension different from ours.
Yeah.
But they seem to be looking for something. And we had the key to it.
Yeah. Now, whether that is figurative or literal, I don't know. I've encountered other dimensions. I mean, from scientific perspective, in string theory, there are multiple dimensions that are folded space within our space that we can't see, but perhaps we could engage. And I've engaged multiple dimensions. I've been to, well over 100 different dimensional realities. Some of them are very different from our reality. They're all affected by our reality in one way or another, both negatively or positively. Some of those dimensions are fallen dimensions, in which they have beings that are aligned to a contradictory way of doing things than God's heart, and some of them have not fallen, and some have offered help. But whether when someone has an experience, they're obviously trying to describe that experience using whatever they saw or whatever they felt. That's not necessarily always a literal thing. So when they talk about the crust of the earth, did they go into the crust of the earth, or did they feel that that's what they were experiencing because what they did experience appeared to be some rocky place or a cave or whatever? See, sometimes we can interpret things out of our own expectations. So if you believe in the city of Atlantis and you suddenly have a vision of some underwater city or some buried city or some city in the crust of the earth, then you would probably associate it with some of the mythology of the things that you believe or have heard about. It may not be, but you may attribute it to it. So I don't know whether there are literal beings. I don't think there are literal beings in the crust of the earth, but there may well be a dimension that is representative of the crust of the earth, perhaps. And that's really what people see. Sometimes it's quite hard to express what you actually see without having some sort of biased view or a pre-existing view. You know, so my first encounter in heaven back in 2008, where I encountered the Firestones and the River of Fire and the throne of God there and the Ancient of Days, it's like I didn't know where I was until I saw this River of Fire. Then I remember that in Daniel, it talks about a river of fire flowing from the throne of God. And then I looked to the source of the river of fire and I saw a throne, or the gleaming of a throne. So it was like, oh, this must be where I am. If I hadn't remembered that, and let's say no one told me, I could have thought, well, I must be in some cave of molten lava under the earth. Because I wouldn't have connected to where I was. And just seeing what I was seeing may have drawn my conclusion to be something other than what it was. You know, so I think a lot of people have experiences like that, which are somewhat symbolic, but they don't necessarily understand the symbolism, and they draw their conclusions from assumptions. And those assumptions are not always right. You know, sometimes I've made assumptions of some of the things I'm seeing and experiencing, and those assumptions have been shaped by my mind. You know, and actually then when I go back to God and say, what was all that about? And it was like, oh, that was nothing what I thought it was about. You know, because I was making an assumption.
Right. Thank you very much.
Denying people's experience, I'm just saying sometimes people have an experience and then they try and interpret what that experience means, and those interpretations are not always correct.
Right. So what I was thinking is probably when we spend half the day on the earth doing things and half the day sleeping.
Yeah.
Is it possible that we go into other dimensions in our sleep? Because some of the experiences that some of us get in dreams are quite real.
Yeah. I mean, dreams can be a reflection of what the spirit is doing. But they can also be just a reflection of our own imagination and the things that are subconsciously need expression. So that doesn't necessarily mean that they're a reflection of something that's literally happened, although it can. And of course, God does give some people dreams that are warnings or preparatory of something that's going to happen in the future. So they have an experience in a dream which appears very real. And at the end of the day, every time I go to sleep, you know, my body sleeps, my soul rests, and my spirit is out. So my spirit is always doing something. And I usually, when I sleep, deliberately choose to make myself available for anything that God might want me to do. You know, and I don't generally have dreams, and I don't tend to remember any of those things until I do. You know, until I need. You know, sometimes I do. Sometimes I have a recollection of something and an inkling of something. And if I choose to go into it, then it will come back in memory. but I sometimes don't bother because I don't need to. I don't need to know what my spirit's doing all the time, but I'm doing it. So my soul has a connection to it. And therefore, when I need to know something about it, I will, because my spirit will have communicated. That's not always at a conscious level. When it becomes conscious, then I'm aware. Then I can share the experience from a position of this is what I was doing, or this is the revelation I had. But generally, I would say that most of people's spirits are functioning in the realms of heaven, even if they don't know it yet.
Yeah. Again, on the restoration. So why do everything have to fall that way? Is it part of Father's plan, eternal plan, that things should fall and the sons will come and restore them?
No, it's not the Father's plan. It's the Father's plan to undo what has happened through individual choice to be independent. So nothing fell until Lucifer fell. So he decided to be like God and to rule over the angelic realm and to be seated, on a throne. He decided to do that, I believe, because he saw the firestones in God's intention for us. And rather than reflecting those firestones from the stones that were on his body, he felt that he was going to be usurped from his position by us. And rather than cooperate with the Father in helping us to mature, he decided to rebel and set up his own thing where people would worship him and where the 4 angels would worship him and he would rule. So he set up a alternative kingdom, if you like, although he's not the king, but he made out to be the king of that kingdom. So then he led Adam and Eve astray. Certainly Eve and Adam followed, and they followed a path of independence because he deceived them. Because in a sense, it talks about, Jesus said that he was a murderer and a liar from the beginning. So who did he murder? Well, we know on earth there was Cain, who murdered Abel. And we know that Cain was of the seed of the serpent, therefore he was a reflection of his father, which was the serpent, and therefore killed Abel, and lied and deceived. So he deceived Adam and Eve. Eve fell for the deception. You can be like God, but you don't need God. You can be like God, and she fell for that, and Adam followed her in that deception. And they then led mankind, or those that followed Adam, into that deception. So all died in Adam. Now, that means that Lucifer was a murderer. So he killed us. He killed mankind, figuratively, in that, yes, there became physical death, but actually what really happened was the death of knowledge. We lost who we are. We lost our identity. We were killed effectively from sonship, whether physically or not, spiritually, definitely. We lost our sense of identity, and we lost our sense of image, and we lost our glory that was covering us, which then internalized, and then we were clothed with a physical body and a soul that got its glory from the world in which it lived and the works in which it did, which is all independence. So identity for most people comes from what they do. Who are you? Well, I'm a fireman, or I'm a policeman, or I'm a businessman, or I'm, it's all about what we do. So identity comes through works, which was the evil of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Hardship, labor, strive, struggling to be. And actually, if they just stayed with God, they already were that person. In fact, they were the person that God created them to be. So in a sense, that was man's choice. They were deceived. Every dimension that has also fallen has also been deceived by the same deception. Some of that deception was instigated by Lucifer through humans. So the Tower of Babel was a reflection of man's desire to make a name for themselves amongst heaven and the dimensions. So the Tower of Babel was a communication device to connect with dimensional realities. And what they transmitted through that communication device before God sort of figuratively, confused their language so they could no longer communicate in a we are one way, because God said, look, if they operate this way, there's nothing they won't be able to do when you operate in oneness and union. So they were confused, and therefore they lost their abilities to do that. But they still affected lots of the dimensions from what they did. So God didn't want dimensions to fall and choose to follow Lucifer or choose to be affected by our influence. He made it to be in relationship with him and in relationship with us. But that obviously got disturbed and messed up. So God always wants to heal what has been destroyed. And what has been damaged, he wants to restore. So his desire is to bring us back to his original intention. Now, you can't go back to the garden and expand the government of God and peace in the way that Adam and Eve would have done if they had not followed that choice, and if they had subdued and overcome the fallen beings, which is what they were commissioned to do, to subdue and to rule. So you can't go back and do the way they would have done it. What we can do is be restored so that we'll do it now in the way that God intends us to do it from our perspective now, which is still the same principle. We want to expand the government of God and the kingdom and love and, peace from this planet. Though this planet will be full of love, joy, and peace. This planet will be at rest. The solar system will be restored to a place of rest and harmony, and that we would then expand that outwards.
So if there had not been a falling, what was Father creating humans for?
Well, we were created for relationship with him as his sons to outwork his heart. So the original mandate for sonship was to be fruitful, to multiply, to increase, fill the earth, to subdue and to rule. So that's never changed. His intention has never changed. We've just ruled in our own strength. So we've created empire. We've created empires that reflect the image of usually one person. So you have, the Persians and the Babylonians and Nebuchadnezzar, and then you've got all the different, and then you've got Alexander the Great, and then you've got the Romans and the Caesars, and you get all these empires. What are they trying to do? They're trying to establish a kingdom on earth, but it's not a heavenly kingdom. It's an earthly one. And of course, they all fall. So you have the fall of Egypt, you've got the fall of Assyria, you've got the fall of Babylon, you've got all these different societies that all wanted to create a name for themselves and an empire. So essentially, that was basically it. It was God's intention for us to always bring about his kingdom on earth and then expand it beyond in love. But when that got messed up, then he still wants to outwork that, but we have to be restored to sonship before that can be outworked. So we've lost our identity as sons, and now that needs to be restored. So then that connects to creation, and then creation's reality can be outworking that.
Wow.
But we can't go back. So we've got to see history restored, in that everything in history that is negatively affecting today needs to be restored. And then we can then go on. Adam and Eve were sinless but not perfected. So they had a process of maturing using the firestones of God to mature at levels of sonship that would be progressively increasing with the level of responsibility that they had. They would have continued to walk with God, and he would have revealed who they really are, and they would have then reflected that glory out from the earth to the rest of the dimensions and the universe and everything else.
So the original plan is to co-create with us. And
I do believe that he wants us to be like him, in that there will be a created ability to be creative. And that means, yes, creating. But ultimately, we don't want to create anything more.
So that's why we have to go through restoration before we can go back to the path of creation.
Yes. Yeah, because we don't want to create out of our own independence. We need to create, out of God's heart for us.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Sweden needs rain. Rain.
Yeah, rain. Yeah, we need rain here too. It's like we had some rain last night, but we haven't had rain really for a month.
And it's not good for agriculture and anything like that. So my question is, should we go to the elementals? Should we ask for a blueprint permission?
Well, I think
go to the elementals, or should we ask God directly?
Well, I think you can pray and ask God, but ultimately, I think God is saying, hey, you've got responsibility for this. Okay. But we also have to look at the overall responsibility of how man is treating the planet from a global perspective. And we have created some of these problems. Some of the problems are a result of the sun and what the sun is doing and how the sun isn't operating as God intended. But some of it is definitely how we've treated the planet. So we do have to start treating it differently if we want it to follow us in sonship. But the elementals are there as those elements that will help us interact with creation. And the weather obviously is part of that. Water and air is part of the elementals, and the earth is part of the elements. So we do want air, water, earth to work together in cooperation so that we have enough water for crops and agriculture and everything else. Now, there are inventions and things that have been discovered that are going to help in this measure, in that there are different forms of water gel and other waters which are being discovered, which will help agriculture immeasurably, but they're not released as yet. But they're on their way. So in the meantime, I think we can call upon the elementals to bring about changes in the weather, but I don't think you can just override the other 7 billion people on the planet who are not necessarily operating in that way. So we're desperate for water here in one sense. It's like I've got a lot of plants in the ground, but I'm speaking to them and I'm calling them to grow, in spite of the fact that we haven't got enough water. Now, I have put in 7 water butts. So I'm collecting loads and loads of water when it did water. And we had 7 full water butts that we're still using to water the plants. So we were wise in that we collected a lot of water. Now you can, in some places there's the hose pipe ban in the UK and you're not allowed to use hose pipes. We've not got a ban here, so we can still do that. But I'd rather use natural water if I can. So, I think we've still got quite a bit of water left. When it rains, we will obviously capture more and more, hopefully, the water. We did have some rain last night when we went to bed, and the soil was a bit damp this morning, which was nice. But it does need a lot more. But I think we have to see the bigger global picture as well as our individual situation. And I believe that by ruling and establishing the kingdom in our individual situations, we can certainly affect change and choose realities around our own situation. So I'm calling for my plants to grow in spite of the lack of water. I've looked to engage with the rain, and we have had a little bit, but I don't feel that almost is how it's going to work. But I'm still calling for my plants to grow, and they are growing. I've got runner beans and they're now producing flowers, and French beans are producing flowers, and I've already harvested a load of salad crops and stuff, and I've got cabbages and stuff in the ground and lots of strawberries and raspberries. But I've had to water the raspberries because I want them now to plump up so I can eat them. I've got lots of raspberry berries, but they need water. So we have watered them. But last night, I think, did give us a bit of water. But I'm not sure that we can just expect everything to change when there's a global patterns of things that we have to deal with, as well as deal with our individual. But, you know, but we don't want to be selfish either. So it's like, oh, please, Father, let it rain on my garden, and no one else's. Is a little bit selfish. So,
my country. My country.
Yeah, I know.
Grace. There's always grace.
Yeah, there's grace. Yeah.
There is lots of forgiveness and grace. Father has lots of grace.
Yeah.
Couldn't we just ask for forgiveness and grace?
Well, yes, I think we can. And I think we need to administrate and govern out of God's heart and desire. And that means, I think, shielding the earth and protecting the earth and looking to administrate in the earth for the changes that are needed in people and the earth itself. But I do also believe that there are agricultural discoveries to be released that are going to help us manage in a less than perfect environment. Because it may mean in the short term we have to find solutions, but in the long term I believe everything will be restored and the whole planet will be restored to fruitfulness, because that's God's intention, that the whole planet would be a garden, and our connection with creation and the plants and everything else would produce a harvest and a bounty or harvest for us.
Amen.
And we'll stop eating the animals. We are not meant to be eating them, are we?
Well, in the grand scheme of things, probably not, as God would have originally intended it in the garden. But God gave permission for Noah to eat the animals because of whatever changes that took place within the animal kingdom. Whatever. I don't think animals were supposed to eat animals either, but they do. So there's something associated with the fall, which is about death. It's about robbing of life. And I think creation has been robbed of life in that way. At the moment, I think ultimately there will be a restoration of that. At the moment, it's not there. So Jesus ate fish. So you've got a sort of, and he probably ate meat. So you've got people say, oh no, he didn't. Well, we know he ate fish, that's for sure. So some people are pescatarians in that they don't eat meat, but they eat fish because Jesus ate fish. Some of them are Christians. Now, I'm not sure about that. I don't really like fish, so it doesn't help me. But at the moment, I guess I am reducing my dependence on meat in my own diet. And I'm actually enjoying much more of a vegetable diet, but I occasionally do like a chili or some chicken. So it's not perfect, but probably at least 60% is now vegetable, whereas probably I would have been much less than that. So I'm probably feeling more led towards that sort of diet. But you have to balance it, because when I first started eating that diet, I lost loads and loads of weight. Now, there's a measure where I was happy to lose some weight because I was probably carrying too much weight. But then I got to a point where I was lighter than when I was 18. And I was like, no, I need to introduce some more calories into my diet, because actually I don't want to lose any more weight. You know, I got to a point where, well, I'm happy as I am, but I don't want to lose any more. So I had to introduce some calories, more calories, you know, and it's, well, how do I healthily introduce more calories? So I had to look at my diet and how I could, you know, and obviously if you're more active, you do need protein. You know, and I would struggle not to eat cheese, because cheese is a big source of protein that I eat, and fat, because I don't eat a lot of sugary stuff. So you do need calories to survive. And, you know, my body burns up 1,800 calories without me doing anything, you know, which is very healthy for a lot of people. They think, oh, yippee, you know, I burn that number of calories just by living. So you have to put in enough calories to live. So you've got to look at your diet, I guess, and look at how you can have a healthy diet that reflects maybe a restoration perspective. You know, I think I'm transitioning that thinking Now, at the moment, you know, dairy for me is something which, you know, I would struggle without. You know, meat I could probably live without. Dairy might be more difficult. You know, but ultimately, you know, I'm always led by God, and, you know, and sometimes he leads you without expressively telling you stuff, and you just find yourself thinking differently about things.
Yeah.
So definitely, you know, I'm sort of, my diet has changed over the last year, without a doubt.
Very true. Thank you.